Thunder had killed 3 men in less than 15 minutes combined, and the horse was scheduled to die in 7 days. Sully, a broken veteran who understood rage and trauma, walked through the gate into the corral where those men had bled out. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The desert sun hung low over the Thornwood Ranch, casting long shadows across the dusty corral, where men gathered in hushed groups, their voices barely above whispers. In the center of their attention stood a massive black stallion, his coat gleaming like polished obsidian in the fading light. His eyes burned with a fury that seemed to challenge anyone who dared meet his gaze. This was Thunder, a name spoken with equal parts fear and reverence throughout the ranching community of western Montana. No ordinary horse, Thunder had earned his reputation through blood and tragedy, and that reputation preceded him like a ghost that refused to be silenced. 3 men had died trying to break him. 3 families had buried fathers, brothers, sons because they believed they could tame what was untamable. The first was Jackson Wheeler, a seasoned horse trainer with 30 years of experience who thought he had seen every kind of spirit in a horse. He lasted less than 5 minutes in the corral with Thunder before the stallion's hooves came down on his chest, crushing the life from him before anyone could react. The second was Marcus Chen, a rodeo champion who had broken hundreds of wild horses and wore his scars like badges of honor. He managed 10 minutes before Thunder threw him against the fence with such force that his neck snapped instantly. The third was young Tommy Reeves, barely 22, who insisted he could succeed where the others had failed because he had youth and fearlessness on his side. Thunder proved that fearlessness was just another word for foolishness, and Tommy's funeral was held on a gray October morning that seemed to weep with the sorrow of a mother who buried her only child. After Tommy's death, the ranch owner, Clayton Thornwood, made a decision that everyone agreed was the only sensible choice. Thunder would be put down. The horse was too dangerous, too wild, too stained with tragedy to ever serve any purpose other than as a cautionary tale. A date was set, the veterinarian was called, and the entire county seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief that this chapter would finally close. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. On a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days before Thunder's scheduled execution, a truck pulled up the long gravel driveway to the Thornwood Ranch. It was an old Ford, the kind that had seen better decades, with rust eating away at the wheel wells and a muffler that announced its arrival long before it came into view. The driver who emerged moved slowly, as though every step required consideration and effort. His name was James Sullivan, though everyone who knew him called him Sully. He was 47 years old but looked 60, with silver threading through his dark hair and deep lines carved into his weathered face like canyons in drought-stricken land. Sully had been a Marine, a fact that defined much of his life even though he rarely spoke about his service. 2 tours in Afghanistan had left him with a Purple Heart, a limp from shrapnel that doctors couldn't completely remove from his left leg, and nightmares that visited him most nights like unwelcome guests who refused to leave. He had returned home to Montana 5 years ago, hoping the wide-open spaces and quiet rhythms of ranch life might offer some peace to a mind that had seen too much violence, too much loss. The peace never fully came, but he found ways to manage, ways to get through each day without completely falling apart. He had heard about Thunder through the grapevine, the way news travels in small communities where everyone knows everyone else's business. A friend mentioned the horse while they were having coffee at the Dusty Trail Diner, speaking about the upcoming execution with a mixture of relief and sadness. Something in the story caught Sully's attention, held it, wouldn't let it go. That night he dreamed about the horse, saw those fierce eyes staring at him, felt a connection he couldn't explain. When he woke the next morning, he knew what he had to do, even if he couldn't articulate why. Clayton Thornwood was in the barn when Sully found him, mucking out stalls with mechanical efficiency. He was a large man in his 60s, with hands like small shovels and a face that had been shaped by sun and wind into something resembling old leather. When Sully explained why he had come, Clayton stopped working and leaned against his pitchfork, studying this stranger with obvious skepticism. "I heard you're planning to put down that black stallion, Thunder," Sully said, his voice quiet but steady. "I'd like to take him off your hands." Clayton laughed, not unkindly, but with genuine disbelief. "Son, that horse has killed 3 men. 3 good men who knew their way around horses. What makes you think you have any business even being near him?" Sully met his eyes without flinching. "I don't know if I can do anything with him, but I'd like the chance to try. If it doesn't work, you can do what you planned. But if there's even a small chance that horse can be reached, don't you think he deserves that chance?" Clayton studied him for a long moment, taking in the scars that peeked out from beneath Sully's collar, the way he favored his left leg, the hollowness behind his eyes that spoke of battles fought far from home. There was something in this broken veteran that reminded Clayton of Thunder, something in the way both of them seemed to carry wounds that went deeper than flesh. Against every instinct that told him this was a terrible idea, against the advice he knew he would receive from everyone on the ranch, Clayton found himself nodding slowly. "You've got 1 week," he said finally. 1 week to show me something. Anything that suggests this isn't a suicide mission. If you can't, then we proceed as planned. No arguments, no extensions. Understood?" Sully extended his hand and they shook on it. 1 week, Sully agreed. "That's all I need." The first time Sully saw Thunder up close, the horse was in the far corral, separated from the other animals like a prisoner in solitary confinement. The fence around him was reinforced steel, the kind you might use to contain a bull rather than a horse, and there were warning signs posted at intervals that seemed almost comical until you remembered why they were necessary. Sully approached slowly, his boots crunching on the dry earth, each step deliberate and measured. He had learned patience in the military, learned that rushing toward danger was often the quickest way to find it. Thunder stood in the center of the corral, his massive frame utterly still except for the occasional flick of his tail. As Sully drew closer, the horse's head turned sharply, those dark eyes locking onto him with an intensity that seemed to pierce through skin and bone. There was no welcome in that gaze, no curiosity, only a burning defiance that declared more clearly than words that this was a creature who would not be conquered. Sully stopped about 20 feet from the fence, close enough to see the scars that marked Thunder's hide, evidence of previous battles, previous attempts to break his spirit through force. For a long time, neither of them moved. Sully simply stood there, hands in his pockets, studying the horse while the horse studied him back. Other ranch hands had gathered at a safe distance, watching this strange standoff with a mixture of curiosity and concern. They had all heard that the new guy, this broken-down veteran, thought he could do what 3 better men had failed to do. Most of them were already planning what they would say at his funeral. Clayton approached after about 15 minutes, his boots announcing his arrival. "So what's your plan?" he asked, his tone suggesting he expected Sully didn't have one. Sully didn't turn away from Thunder when he answered. "No plan yet, just getting to know each other." Clayton snorted. "That horse doesn't want to know you, he wants to kill you." "Maybe," Sully said quietly, "but I don't think so. I think he wants to be left alone, and every time someone tries to force him into something, he fights back. Can't say I blame him for that." There was something in the way Sully said it, a kinship in his voice, that made Clayton pause. He looked at this veteran with new eyes, seeing perhaps what Sully himself had recognized, a mirror of sorts between man and beast. "You see yourself in that horse, don't you?" Clayton asked, not unkindly. Sully finally turned to face him. "I see someone who's been through hell and doesn't trust anyone anymore. Someone who fights because it's the only thing he knows how to do." "Yeah," I guess I see myself in that. That first day, Sully didn't try to enter the corral. He didn't make any grand gestures or attempts to assert dominance. He simply stayed near the fence, sometimes talking in a low voice, sometimes just standing in silence. He told Thunder about Afghanistan, about the things he had seen, the friends he had lost, the noise that still echoed in his head during quiet moments. He spoke about the night his convoy hit an IED, about waking up in a field hospital with his leg torn apart and his mind shattered into pieces he was still trying to put back together. He talked about the guilt he carried, the weight of surviving when better men hadn't, the anger that lived in his chest like a second heartbeat. Thunder listened, or seemed to listen. The horse remained wary, keeping his distance, but something in his posture suggested he was paying attention. Maybe it was the tone of Sully's voice, calm and non-threatening, so different from the aggressive energy of the men who had tried to break him before. Maybe it was something else, something indefinable that existed in that space between species, a recognition that both of them carried wounds that couldn't be seen, but were no less real. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed to set the clouds on fire, Sully prepared to leave. Before he did, he spoke one more time to Thunder. "I know you don't have any reason to trust me. Hell, I don't have many reasons to trust myself these days, but I'm going to come back tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. I'm not going to try to break you or hurt you. I just want to be here, if that's okay with you. If it's not, then I guess we'll figure that out together." That night, Sully stayed in the small bunkhouse Clayton had offered him, a simple room with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the corrals. He lay awake for hours, as he often did, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into sleep. The nightmares came as expected, pulling him back to the desert, to the explosion, to the screams of his brothers in arms. He woke gasping, drenched in sweat, his heart racing like it was trying to escape his chest. This was normal. This was his life now, these moments of terror that visited him in the dark. He got up and went to the window, needing to ground himself in the present, to remind himself that he was here in Montana, not there in that burning vehicle. His eyes found Thunder's corral, and in the moonlight, he could see the horse's silhouette. Thunder was awake too, standing in the same spot he had occupied all day, his head raised as though he were keeping watch against invisible threats. In that moment, Sully felt that connection again, that recognition of two souls who understood what it meant to be haunted by the past. Tomorrow would be day 2 of his week. 6 days left to prove that something broken could be mended, that trust could be rebuilt even after it had been shattered. 6 days to save Thunder's life, and maybe, just maybe, to find a piece of his own redemption in the process. Day 2 began before dawn, as most of Sully's days did. Sleep was something he had learned to do without, catching an hour here and there when exhaustion finally overpowered the memories. He dressed in the dark, pulled on his worn boots, and made his way across the ranch grounds while the world was still painted in shades of gray and blue. The air was cold, carrying with it the promise of autumn, and his breath formed small clouds that dissipated almost as quickly as they appeared. Thunder was already awake when Sully reached the corral, standing in almost exactly the same spot as the night before. The horse watched his approach with those same fierce eyes, but Sully thought he detected something different this morning, a slight tilt of the head that suggested curiosity rather than outright hostility. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but Sully had learned in combat that small things often mattered most. The difference between life and death could come down to a change in wind direction, a shadow falling differently, a half-second of hesitation. "Good morning, Thunder," Sully said quietly as he settled himself on the ground outside the corral, his back against a fence post. This was his plan for day 2, the same as day 1, simply being present without making demands, without expecting anything in return. He had brought a thermos of coffee and a book, though he doubted he would do much reading. Mostly, he just wanted Thunder to get used to him being there, to understand that his presence didn't mean danger or pain. The ranch hands started their day around 6, and several of them passed by Thunder's corral on their way to morning chores. They looked at Sully sitting there on the ground, looked at Thunder standing motionless in the center of the corral, and shook their heads with expressions that ranged from pity to amusement. One of them, a grizzled cowboy named Pete who had been working at Thornwood for over 20 years, stopped to offer some unsolicited advice. "You're wasting your time, son. That horse is mean clear through. Ain't no amount of sitting gonna change what he is." Sully looked up at Pete, squinting against the rising sun. "Maybe you're right. But maybe being mean is just what happens when everyone expects you to be something you're not. When everyone tries to force you into a shape that doesn't fit." Pete spat tobacco juice into the dirt and walked away, muttering something about foolish city folk who didn't understand horses. Sully didn't bother explaining that he had grown up on a ranch not unlike this one, that he knew his way around horses just fine. It didn't matter what Pete thought. The only opinion that mattered was Thunder's. As the morning progressed and the sun climbed higher, warming the air and burning away the early chill, something shifted in the corral. Thunder, who had maintained his distance all of the previous day, took 3 steps closer to where Sully sat. It wasn't much, just 3 steps, but it was movement toward him rather than away, and Sully's heart quickened with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He didn't react, didn't acknowledge the movement with any gesture that might spook the horse. He just continued sitting there, occasionally sipping his coffee, occasionally looking up at the sky as though Thunder's proximity was the most natural thing in the world. By midday, Thunder had closed half the distance between them, now standing maybe 30 feet away instead of 60. Sully could see him more clearly now, could make out the details that distance had obscured. The horse was magnificent despite the scars, despite the wildness that surrounded him like an aura. His muscles rippled beneath that black coat, speaking of power barely contained. His mane was long and tangled, catching the light in ways that made it seem almost blue, but it was his eyes that held Sully's attention. Those deep, dark eyes that seemed to contain entire worlds of pain and fury and loneliness. "I know what you're feeling," Sully said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know what it's like to have everyone look at you and see something dangerous, something broken beyond repair. I know what it's like to wake up every morning and feel like you're carrying a weight that's going to crush you eventually. But here's the thing, Thunder. Here's what I've learned. You don't have to let what happened to you define what happens next. You don't have to keep being the thing they expect you to be." Thunder's ears flicked forward, a subtle movement that suggested he was listening, processing. Animals were better than people at reading intent, at sensing the truth beneath words. They couldn't be fooled by false sentiment or empty promises. Thunder would know if Sully was lying, if this was just another trick, another attempt to dominate him through different means. But Sully wasn't lying. Every word came from a place of genuine understanding, from someone who recognized his own reflection in this angry, wounded creature. Clayton came by around 2 in the afternoon, leaning against the fence with his arms crossed over his chest. He had been watching from a distance all morning, monitoring this strange dance between man and beast. "Well, you've survived day 2. That's something. Most people wouldn't even get this close to him." Sully stood up, stretching legs that had gone stiff from sitting. "He's coming around. Slowly, but he's coming around." Clayton raised an eyebrow. "He's 30 feet away from you and looks like he's deciding which part of you to stomp on first. That's not what I'd call coming around." But Sully shook his head. "Yesterday, he stayed at the far end of the corral all day. Today, he's cut that distance in half. That's progress. That's him deciding maybe I'm not a threat." Clayton wanted to argue, wanted to point out that 5 days wasn't enough time to undo months of violence and fear, but something in Sully's expression stopped him. There was a certainty there, a quiet confidence that reminded Clayton of good horse trainers he had known, the ones who worked through patience rather than force. "All right," he said finally. "You've got 5 more days. Make them count." Day 3 brought rain, the kind of steady drizzle that soaked through clothing and turned the ground into mud that sucked at your boots with every step. Most of the ranch hands stayed inside or under cover, using the weather as an excuse to catch up on equipment maintenance and paperwork. But Sully was at Thunder's corral before sunrise, just as he had been the previous 2 days, settling himself into his spot against the fence post despite the water that immediately began seeping through his jacket. Thunder stood in the rain looking like some mythical creature from an old story, steam rising from his dark coat as the cold drops met his warm body. He was closer than he had been when Sully left the night before, positioned perhaps 20 feet away, and when Sully arrived, the horse turned his head to watch him sit down. There was something almost expectant in that gaze, as though Thunder had been waiting for him, anticipating his arrival. Sully pulled his collar up against the rain and smiled slightly. "Not the best day for this, is it, boy? But I figure if you're out here in it, the least I can do is keep you company." He had brought another thermos of coffee, and the warmth of it against his hands was a small comfort against the chill. The rain drummed against the metal roof of a nearby shed, creating a rhythm that was almost soothing, almost peaceful. In Afghanistan, rain had been rare, something to celebrate when it came. Here it was just another part of life, another element to endure. As the morning wore on, something remarkable happened. Thunder, who had maintained that 20-foot distance when Sully arrived, began to move closer. Not in a rush, not with any sense of urgency, but in small incremental steps, each one deliberate and considered. 10 feet, 5 feet. And then, in a moment that made Sully's breath catch in his throat, Thunder stepped right up to the fence, separated from him by nothing but steel bars and about 3 feet of space. This close, Sully could see every detail of the horse's face. The small white star on his forehead that was barely visible against his dark coat. The way his nostrils flared slightly with each breath. The intelligence in those eyes that spoke of a thinking, feeling creature who had experienced trauma and survived it, however damaged. Sully remained completely still, barely breathing, knowing that this was a critical moment. Thunder had chosen to come closer, had made himself vulnerable in a way he hadn't done since arriving at the ranch. Any wrong move, any sudden gesture, could shatter this fragile trust. "Hey there, Thunder," Sully whispered, his voice so soft it was almost lost in the sound of rain. "Thank you for trusting me this much. I know it's not easy." Thunder's ears twitched, tracking the sound of Sully's voice, and for several long minutes they stayed like that, man and horse separated by a fence but connected by something deeper, something that had been building over the past 3 days. Slowly, moving with the kind of caution usually reserved for diffusing explosives, Sully raised his hand and extended it toward the fence, palm open, fingers relaxed. He didn't try to touch Thunder, didn't reach through the bars. He simply offered his hand, letting the horse make the choice about what came next. Thunder stared at that outstretched hand, his body tense, every muscle coiled like a spring ready to release. The seconds stretched into minutes, and Sully's arm began to ache from holding the position, but he didn't move, didn't waver. Then, in a moment that Sully would replay in his mind thousands of times in the years to come, Thunder lowered his head and extended his neck, bringing his muzzle close to Sully's hand. He didn't make contact, not quite, but he sniffed, drawing in Sully's scent, learning him in the way that horses do. It lasted maybe 5 seconds before Thunder pulled back, but those 5 seconds were everything. They were a bridge being built, a connection being forged, a possibility being created where none had existed before. Clayton had been watching from the barn door, trying to stay dry while keeping an eye on what was happening in the corral. When he saw Thunder approach the fence, Saw that moment of near contact, he felt something shift in his chest. He had been around horses his entire life, had seen hundreds of them broken and trained, but he had never seen anything quite like this. That horse should be trying to kill that man, he muttered to himself. 3 days ago, he would have. What the hell is happening out there? What was happening was something that couldn't be easily explained or quantified. It was the meeting of two damaged souls who recognized something essential in each other. It was proof that violence and force weren't the only ways to reach a traumatized creature, that patience and understanding could achieve what brutality could not. It was a small miracle happening in the rain on a Thursday morning on a ranch in Montana, witnessed by a handful of people who would later struggle to put into words what they had seen. By midday, Thunder had returned to the center of the corral, putting distance between himself and Sully once more. But something fundamental had changed. The hostility that had radiated from him like heat was diminished, replaced by something closer to watchful curiosity. He no longer looked at Sully as a threat to be destroyed, but as a puzzle to be solved, a presence to be evaluated and considered. Sully remained at his post despite being thoroughly soaked, despite the cold that had settled into his bones. He knew he was being tested, knew that Thunder was watching to see if he would give up when conditions became uncomfortable. This was about more than just training a horse. This was about showing Thunder that commitment meant something, that someone could promise to be there and actually follow through. Too many people and too many things in Sully's life had made promises they didn't keep. He wouldn't be one of them. Day 4 dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean and left behind air that smelled of wet earth and fresh possibilities. Sully's joints ached from yesterday's rain vigil, and his leg throbbed with the deep bone pain that always came when weather moved through. But he was at Thunder's corral at his usual time, carrying not just coffee but also a bucket of apples he had asked Clayton for. He wasn't sure if Thunder would accept food from him, wasn't even sure if offering it was the right move. But something told him it was time to try. Thunder was waiting near the fence when Sully arrived, positioned in almost the exact spot where he had stood the previous day during their moment of connection. This wasn't coincidence. The horse had learned that this was where Sully would be, had anticipated his arrival, and positioned himself accordingly. It was a level of engagement that made Sully's chest tighten with something between hope and fear, knowing that they were entering new territory now, moving beyond simple observation into actual interaction. "Morning, Thunder," Sully said as he settled down with his back against the post. "I brought you something today. Don't know if you like apples, but I figured it was worth a try." He reached into the bucket and pulled out a large red apple, holding it up so Thunder could see it clearly. The horse's ears perked forward, his nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of the fruit. Sully could see the war happening behind those dark eyes, the desire for the apple fighting against the deeply ingrained suspicion of anything offered by human hands. Sully set the apple on the ground, just inside the fence line, using a long stick to push it through the bars so he wouldn't have to reach into the corral. Then he returned to his sitting position and waited, giving Thunder the space to make his own decision. Minutes passed, stretching into a quarter hour, then half an hour. Other ranch hands came and went, some pausing to watch this strange standoff, others simply shaking their heads and moving on to their work. Pete walked by and couldn't resist commenting, "You gonna sit there all day staring at that apple?" Sully smiled without taking his eyes off Thunder. "If that's what it takes." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Thunder took a step toward the apple, then another. His movements were cautious, calculated, every step evaluated for danger before the next one was taken. When he reached the apple, he paused, lowering his head to sniff it thoroughly, checking for any hint of deception or poison. Apparently satisfied, he picked it up with his teeth and crushed it, the sound of the fruit breaking crisp in the morning air. He chewed slowly, thoughtfully, and when he was finished, he looked directly at Sully, as though to say he had passed some kind of test. "Good boy," Sully said quietly, fighting the urge to stand up or make any sudden movement that might break the spell. "That's good, Thunder. You see, I'm not here to hurt you." Thunder's response was to take 3 more steps closer, bringing him within 10 feet of where Sully sat. This was closer than he had been even yesterday, closer than Sully had dared hope for on day 4. The horse stood there studying him, that magnificent head tilted slightly as though trying to understand what made this human different from all the others who had tried to conquer him. Sully began to talk, his voice low and steady, telling Thunder about the things that haunted him in the dark hours. He talked about his best friend Marcus, who had died in the blast that shattered Sully's leg, how Marcus had been planning to propose to his girlfriend when they got home, how Sully still couldn't look at engagement rings without feeling a crushing weight of survivor's guilt. He talked about the young private, barely 19, who had looked to Sully for guidance and reassurance, who had died calling for his mother, while Sully held his hand and lied that everything would be okay. He talked about the anger that lived inside him, the rage that sometimes exploded over nothing and left him shaking and ashamed. "I don't know why I'm telling you all this," Sully said, his voice cracking slightly. "Maybe because you're the only one who doesn't look at me like I'm crazy or broken. Maybe because you understand what it's like to have people expect things from you that you can't give. Maybe because we're both just trying to survive in a world that doesn't make much sense anymore." Thunder listened, and in his listening there was something almost like understanding, a recognition that transcended the barriers of species and language. As the day progressed, Thunder accepted 2 more apples from Sully, each time coming a little closer, staying a little longer. By afternoon, he was close enough that Sully could have reached out and touched him if he had been standing, close enough that Sully could see his own reflection in those dark eyes. But Sully didn't try to touch him, didn't push for more than Thunder was willing to give. This was about letting the horse set the pace, about respecting boundaries even when you desperately wanted to cross them. Clayton came by in the late afternoon, his expression unreadable as he watched Thunder standing so close to Sully. "I've been doing this for 40 years, he said quietly, "and I've never seen anything like what's happening here. That horse should be untouchable, but somehow you're reaching him." Sully looked up at him, squinting against the sun. "We're reaching each other. That's the difference. Everyone who came before tried to break him, tried to make him into something he wasn't. I'm just trying to meet him where he is." Clayton nodded slowly, understanding more than he could articulate. "You've got 3 more days, but I'm starting to think you might actually pull this off." Day 5 arrived with a sense of anticipation that hung over the ranch like morning mist. Word had spread among the hands about what was happening with Thunder, and several of them found excuses to work near the corral, sneaking glances at the man and the horse who seemed to be defying everything they thought they knew about animal behavior. Bets had been quietly placed in the bunkhouse about whether Sully would survive the week, though the odds had shifted dramatically over the past few days, from certain death to possible success. Sully arrived at dawn as always, but today he brought something different. Along with the bucket of apples, he carried a soft bristle brush, the kind used for grooming horses. It sat in his jacket pocket like a promise, like a bridge he might or might not have the chance to cross. He had spent most of the previous night awake, wondering if he was moving too fast, if pushing for physical contact might undo all the progress they had made. But something in Thunder's eyes yesterday, something in the way the horse had lingered near him, suggested that maybe the time was right. Thunder was already at the fence when Sully sat down, positioned in what had become their spot, the place where invisible walls were being dismantled one moment at a time. "Good morning, boy," Sully said, his voice carrying the warmth of genuine affection. The horse nickered softly in response, a sound that made several watching ranch hands exchange surprised glances. Thunder didn't make friendly sounds. Thunder didn't respond to greetings. Yet here he was, acting like a normal horse greeting a familiar person, as though the past months of violence and fear were slowly being rewritten into a different story. Sully offered the first apple of the day, and Thunder took it without hesitation, crunching it between powerful jaws while standing close enough that Sully could feel the warmth radiating from his massive body. While the horse ate, Sully pulled out the brush and held it where Thunder could see it clearly. "I'd like to brush you today if you'll let me. No pressure, no force. Just helping you look as good as you deserve to look." Thunder's ears flicked back and forth, processing this new element, evaluating whether the brush represented danger or something else. What happened next would be discussed and debated among the ranch hands for years to come. Sully stood up slowly, every movement telegraphed and deliberate, and approached the fence. He didn't try to enter the corral, respecting that boundary, but he positioned himself where he could reach through the bars if Thunder allowed it. The horse watched him with those intelligent eyes, watched the brush in Sully's hand, watched the way Sully's body language spoke of patience and respect rather than domination. Then Thunder did something extraordinary. He stepped forward and pressed his neck against the fence bars, positioning himself so that Sully could reach him. It was an invitation, clear and unmistakable, a gesture of trust that seemed to stop time itself. Sully's hand trembled slightly as he reached through with the brush, and when the bristles made contact with Thunder's coat, he felt a jolt of connection so profound it nearly brought tears to his eyes. "Easy, boy, easy," Sully murmured as he began to brush in long, gentle strokes. Thunder's coat was matted and tangled from months of neglect, from being treated as a dangerous animal rather than a creature deserving of care. Sully worked slowly, methodically, untangling the knots with patience, never pulling or forcing, always giving Thunder the option to move away if it became too much. But Thunder didn't move away. Instead, he leaned into the brushing, his eyes half closing in what looked unmistakably like pleasure. Pete, who had been watching from across the yard, walked over slowly, shaking his head in disbelief. "I'll be damned," he said quietly. "I've been around horses my whole life, and I've never seen anything like this. 3 men died trying to touch that animal, and here you are, brushing him like he's somebody's pet." Sully didn't stop his gentle strokes as he responded. "That's because they were trying to touch him. I'm just offering. He gets to decide if he wants it or not. That's the whole difference right there." The grooming session lasted nearly an hour, and by the end of it, Thunder's coat had begun to show its true luster, the black gleaming in the sunlight like polished stone. Sully had worked his way down Thunder's neck, across his shoulders, anywhere the horse would allow. There were still large areas he couldn't reach, places where Thunder's trust didn't yet extend, but that was okay. They had time. At least Sully hoped they had time. 2 more days remained of his week, and he still hadn't attempted what everyone would consider the real test, actually entering the corral with Thunder, standing in that space where 3 men had lost their lives. After the grooming session, Thunder didn't retreat to the center of the corral as he usually did. Instead, he remained near the fence, near Sully, as though reluctant to give up this newfound companionship. They spent the rest of the morning like that, the man sitting on one side of the fence, the horse standing on the other, separated by steel but connected by something that transcended physical barriers. Sully talked about his plans for the future, tentative ideas about what he might do with his life now that he had found something that gave him purpose again. "Maybe I could work with horses like you," he said to Thunder. "Horses that everyone else has given up on. Seems like maybe that's something I'd be good at, understanding creatures who've been through trauma. We could help each other, you know. You're teaching me that it's possible to trust again, possible to open up even after everything tells you not to. Maybe I can do the same for others like you." Thunder's response was to take another step closer, closing the gap until his head was directly in front of Sully, close enough that Sully could feel the horse's breath on his face. Day 6 brought with it a weight that settled on Sully's shoulders like physical pressure. Tomorrow was the deadline. Tomorrow Clayton would make his final decision about Thunder's fate, And while the progress had been remarkable, Sully knew that ultimately what mattered was whether he could do what no one else had managed to do. He needed to enter that corral. He needed to stand in the space where 3 men had died and prove that Thunder could be with a human without violence, without fear, without the rage that had defined him for so long. The morning air was crisp and cool, carrying hints of the winter that would arrive in a few months. Sully's hand shook slightly as he approached the corral, not from fear exactly, but from the magnitude of what he was about to attempt. He had faced enemy fire, had run toward danger more times than he could count during his service, but this felt different. This felt personal in a way that combat never had. If he failed here, it wouldn't just mean his own death. It would mean Thunder's death too, and that thought was unbearable. Thunder was waiting at their usual spot, but there was something different in his bearing today, an alertness that suggested he sensed something important was about to happen. Animals had an uncanny ability to read human energy, to pick up on subtle cues that even we weren't conscious of projecting. Thunder knew today was different before Sully said a single word. "Morning, boy," Sully said, his voice steady despite the anxiety churning in his gut. "I think today might be the day. I think today we find out if we can really do this together." He held up an apple, and Thunder approached immediately to take it. The ritual of the past days now so familiar, it felt almost mundane. But there was nothing mundane about what Sully was planning next. He walked along the fence to the gate, the locked entrance that separated him from Thunder's domain. His fingers touched the cold metal of the latch, and he stood there for a long moment, gathering his courage. Behind him, he could sense the ranch hands who had stopped their work to watch, could feel their collective holding of breath. They all knew what was about to happen. They had all seen the makeshift memorial by the barn, the place where names of the 3 dead men were carved into a wooden post. Those names were a warning and a reminder of the stakes. Thunder watched Sully at the gate, his body completely still, his eyes tracking every movement. There was no aggression in his posture, but there was wariness, a tension that spoke of readiness to react in whatever way became necessary. This was the moment of truth, the moment when Thunder would have to decide if the trust they had built over 5 days was strong enough to allow this ultimate breach of his space. Sully opened the gate slowly, the hinges creaking in protest. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the morning stillness, amplified by the absolute silence of everyone watching. He stepped through the opening and closed the gate behind him, and suddenly there was nothing between him and Thunder except 30 feet of open ground and the question of whether the past could be overcome by the present. "I'm coming to you now," Sully said quietly, taking his first step into the corral. Thunder's ears pinned back slightly, not in outright aggression but in uncertainty. Another step. Thunder shifted his weight, muscles bunching, preparing for flight or fight. Another step. Sully's heart hammered in his chest, but he kept his breathing steady, kept his movements slow and non-threatening. He had learned in the military that fear was contagious, that animals and humans alike could smell it on you. He needed to project calm, even though every instinct screamed at him to reconsider this decision. 5 steps into the corral now, then 10. Thunder hadn't moved toward him or away from him, locked in his own internal struggle between the trust that had been building and the trauma that told him humans in his space meant pain. 15 steps. Sully was halfway across now, committed to this course of action, no longer able to retreat without potentially triggering the chase response that could turn deadly. "It's okay, Thunder," Sully continued in that same gentle voice. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But we've come this far together, and I believe in you. I believe you can do this." 20 steps now, and Thunder's entire body was trembling with the effort of holding himself in place, of resisting the overwhelming urge to charge at this intruder or flee to the far corner of the corral. Then something remarkable happened. Thunder took a step forward, closing the distance between them instead of increasing it. It was a choice, a conscious decision to move toward the fear instead of away from it. Sully felt tears prick at his eyes at the courage this represented, the tremendous act of will it took for this traumatized animal to override every instinct and choose trust. Another step from Thunder, then another. They were 20 feet apart now, then 15, then 10. Sully stopped moving, letting Thunder come the rest of the way, giving the horse control over the final approach. The corral was silent except for the sound of Thunder's hooves on packed dirt, each step measured and deliberate. 5 feet away now, 3 feet. And then Thunder was standing directly in front of him, so close that Sully could see his own reflection in those deep, dark eyes. "Hey, boy," Sully whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it. We did it." Slowly giving Thunder every opportunity to move away, Sully raised his hand and placed it against the horse's neck. Thunder flinched slightly at the contact but didn't pull away, didn't strike out, didn't do any of the things that had killed 3 men before him. Instead, he leaned into Sully's touch, accepting it, maybe even welcoming it. The moment stretched between them like something sacred, something that transcended the ordinary boundaries of human and animal interaction. Sully's hand rested on Thunder's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the skin, the warmth of life pulsing through this magnificent creature who had been written off as nothing more than a killer. He could feel Thunder's heartbeat, rapid but steady, matching the rhythm of his own racing pulse. They stood like that for what might have been seconds or might have been hours, time becoming meaningless in the face of what they had accomplished together. From outside the corral, Sully heard a collective exhale, as though everyone who had been watching had been holding their breath for the entire encounter. Pete's voice cut through the silence, rough with emotion. "I'll be damned, I'll be absolutely damned. That man just walked into Thunder's corral and lived to tell about it." Others murmured in agreement, their voices carrying notes of disbelief and wonder. Some of them had known Jackson Wheeler, had attended his funeral. Others had worked alongside Marcus Chen, had drunk with him and laughed at his stories. They all remembered Tommy Reeves, so young and full of confidence that had proved fatally misplaced. Yet here was Sully, standing in the same space where those men had died, his hand on Thunder's neck, both of them alive and unharmed. Clayton walked slowly toward the corral, his weathered face showing an expression Sully had never seen before. It was something between awe and respect, mixed with a hint of something that might have been regret. When he reached the fence, he gripped the top rail with both hands and just stared for a long moment before speaking. "I owe you an apology, son. When you showed up here asking for a chance with this horse, I thought you were either crazy or stupid or both. I gave you that week because I figured you deserved the dignity of trying, not because I thought you'd succeed, but I was wrong. You've done something I didn't think was possible." Sully turned his head slightly to acknowledge Clayton's words, but he didn't remove his hand from Thunder or step away from the horse. He understood instinctively that this moment was fragile, that maintaining the connection was more important than accepting praise. "It wasn't about me being special, Clayton. It was about seeing Thunder as something other than a problem to be solved or an animal to be dominated. He's not broken. He never was. He was just responding to how he was being treated." Thunder shifted slightly, moving his head to rest it against Sully's shoulder in a gesture of trust that seemed impossible given the horse's history. Sully brought his other hand up and began stroking Thunder's face with gentle fingers, tracing the contours of his jaw, the velvet softness of his muzzle. The horse's eyes half closed, and a sound emerged from deep in his chest, something between a sigh and a rumble that spoke of contentment, of a tension finally being released. "You know what this means, don't you?" Clayton said, his voice carrying a weight of realization. "This changes everything. Word is going to spread about what you've done here, about how you reached this horse when everyone else failed. People are going to want to know how you did it. They're going to want you to work with their problem horses." Sully had been thinking the same thing, had been wondering if maybe this was the purpose he had been searching for since coming home from the war. Maybe this is what I'm supposed to do. Maybe all the things I went through, all the pain and the fear and the trauma, maybe it was preparing me for this. To help creatures who've been hurt, who've learned not to trust, who just need someone to see them as something other than dangerous or damaged. Thunder lifted his head from Sully's shoulder and took a step back, creating a small distance between them. For a moment, Sully's heart clenched with fear that he had pushed too far, stayed too long. But Thunder's body language wasn't defensive or aggressive. He was simply asserting his need for space, establishing that while he accepted Sully's presence, he still maintained his own boundaries. Sully respected that immediately, taking his own step back and giving Thunder room to breathe. "That's right, boy. You get to decide how this goes. Always. I'm not here to force you into anything." Sully began walking slowly around the corral, not approaching Thunder directly but moving in a wide circle that allowed the horse to track him, to understand that Sully could share his space without being a threat. Thunder watched him carefully, his head turning to follow Sully's progress, but there was no tension in his body now, no preparation for violence. He was simply observing, learning, accepting this new reality where a human could exist in his territory without triggering his defensive responses. As Sully completed his circuit of the corral, he noticed something that made him smile. Thunder had begun following him, maintaining about 10 feet of distance, but definitely tracking his movements, choosing to stay close rather than retreating to the far corner. It was a subtle thing, something many people might not have noticed, but to Sully it represented yet another breakthrough. Thunder wasn't just tolerating his presence anymore. He was actively seeking it out, finding comfort in proximity to this human who had proven himself trustworthy. The two of them walked together like that for nearly half an hour, man and horse moving in a slow dance around the corral, while ranch hands watched in amazement. Some of them had pulled out their phones, recording video of this impossible scene, knowing that no one would believe them otherwise. Others simply stood and stared, trying to process what they were witnessing, trying to reconcile this calm, peaceful interaction with the violent history that had led to 3 deaths in this very space. Finally, as the sun climbed higher and the morning began transitioning toward afternoon, Sully decided it was time to leave the corral. He had proven what needed to be proven, had shown that Thunder could be with a human without violence. Pushing for more today would be greedy, would risk undoing the careful trust they had built. He walked to the gate and Thunder followed him all the way, stopping just a few feet away as Sully opened the latch and stepped through. Day 7 arrived with a sense of completion, as though the universe had been holding its breath and could finally exhale. Sully woke before dawn as usual, but this time there was no anxiety twisting in his gut, no fear about what the day might bring. He had done what he set out to do. He had saved Thunder's life, and in the process had found something he thought he had lost forever in the deserts of Afghanistan. He had found purpose, a reason to get up in the morning that went beyond simply surviving until nightfall. Clayton was waiting for him outside the bunkhouse, 2 cups of coffee steaming in the cool morning air. He handed one to Sully with a nod of greeting. "Figured we should talk before you head out to see Thunder. There are some things that need to be discussed." Sully accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping his cold hands around the warm ceramic. "All right, I'm listening." "That horse is yours if you want him," Clayton said without preamble. "I can't in good conscience send Thunder to auction or try to work him into the ranch rotation after everything that's happened, but you've done something remarkable with him, and I think he belongs with you now. If you'll take him, he's yours. No charge. Consider it payment for showing this old man that he still has things to learn." The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Accepting Thunder meant accepting responsibility for a traumatized animal who would require continued patience and care. It meant committing to a future that looked very different from the aimless, drifting Sully had been doing since leaving the service. It meant choosing to stay in one place, to build something, to allow himself to form attachments despite knowing how much it hurt when attachments were severed. But as Sully thought about it, he realized the decision had already been made somewhere in his heart, during those long hours sitting outside Thunder's corral. "I'll take him," Sully said simply. "Thank you, Clayton. I know this isn't an easy decision for you, given everything that's happened." Clayton shook his head slowly. "Easiest decision I've made in months, actually. That horse deserves someone who understands him, and you deserve a chance to do something meaningful with your life. Seems like you two need each other." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee before continuing. "There's something else, too. I'd like to offer you a job here on the ranch. We could use someone with your skills, and having you around to work with Thunder makes sense. There's also a small cottage on the property that's been sitting empty. It's yours if you want it." The generosity of the offer surprised Sully, though perhaps it shouldn't have. He had seen enough of Clayton over the past week to know he was a good man despite his gruff exterior, someone who valued competence and character over credentials and background. A job and a place to live meant stability, something Sully hadn't experienced since before his deployment. It meant roots, community, the possibility of healing in an environment that felt safe. "I don't know what to say," Sully admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "A week ago I was drifting, trying to figure out what to do with my life. Now you're offering me everything I didn't know I needed." Clayton smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face into something almost gentle. Sometimes life works that way. Sometimes you find what you're looking for in the place you least expect it. Now finish your coffee and go see your horse. I imagine he's waiting for you." Thunder was indeed waiting, positioned at the fence in their usual spot, his head raised and ears forward as Sully approached. There was an eagerness in his bearing that hadn't been there before, an anticipation that spoke of genuine connection. When Sully reached the corral, he didn't hesitate this time. He opened the gate and walked directly in, and Thunder met him halfway, closing the distance with confident strides that showed how far they had come in just 7 days. "Morning, Thunder," Sully said, running his hands along the horse's neck, feeling the power and warmth beneath his palms. "I've got some news for you. Looks like we're going to be spending a lot more time together. You're mine now, and I'm yours. We're a team." Thunder responded by pressing his forehead against Sully's chest, a gesture of affection that seemed almost human in its expressiveness. Sully wrapped his arms around the horse's massive head, holding him close, and felt tears streaming down his face without shame or embarrassment. Over the following weeks, the transformation in both Sully and Thunder became increasingly apparent. The horse who had been too dangerous to approach was now following Sully around the ranch like a devoted companion, his earlier aggression replaced by a calm confidence that came from knowing he was safe. Sully worked with him daily, not trying to break him or train him in the traditional sense, but simply building on the trust they had established. He taught Thunder to accept a halter, to walk beside him without a lead rope, to stand calmly while being groomed or having his hooves checked. But more than that, Thunder taught Sully. The horse became a mirror for Sully's own healing, showing him that trauma didn't have to define the rest of his life, that trust could be rebuilt even after it had been shattered, that there was value in being gentle with yourself and others. On the nights when the nightmares came, when Sully woke up gasping and disoriented, he would walk out to Thunder's paddock and find the horse waiting in the moonlight as though he somehow sensed when Sully needed him. Word spread through the ranching community about what had happened at Thornwood Ranch, about the veteran who had tamed the untamable horse through patience instead of force. People started calling, asking if Sully might work with their problem animals, horses that had been abused or neglected or had simply given up on humans. At first, Sully was hesitant. unsure if what had worked with Thunder would translate to other animals. But Clayton encouraged him, and soon Sully found himself building a reputation as someone who could reach horses others had written off as hopeless. 5 years passed like water flowing through a steady stream, each day adding to the transformation that had begun with a broken veteran and a dangerous horse in a dusty corral. The cottage that Clayton had offered Sully became a true home, filled with books about horse psychology and training methods, photographs of Thunder at various stages of their journey together, and mementos from the horses and people whose lives Sully had touched through his work. The nightmares still came sometimes, but they were less frequent now, less intense, and when they did visit him in the dark hours, he knew exactly where to find comfort. Thunder had become something of a legend in the region, the horse who had killed 3 men and then been saved by a man who understood that violence wasn't the only response to trauma. People would drive from hours away just to see him, to watch as he and Sully worked together with the effortless communication that comes from years of partnership. Thunder was no longer the terrifying creature who had inspired fear in everyone who saw him. He had grown into a magnificent animal whose presence radiated calm confidence, whose dark eyes reflected wisdom earned through suffering and redemption. On a crisp autumn morning similar to the one when Sully had first arrived at the ranch, a truck pulled up the gravel driveway carrying a family with a desperate story and a traumatized horse. The gelding in their trailer had been rescued from a neglect situation where he had been starved and beaten. And despite months of patient care, he remained aggressive and fearful, lashing out at anyone who tried to approach him. The family had heard about Sully, about what he had accomplished with Thunder, and they were willing to try anything before making the difficult decision to put the horse down. Sully listened to their story with the patience he had learned from Thunder, hearing not just the facts, but the emotion beneath them, the love these people had for an animal they desperately wanted to save. When they finished talking, he walked them to the paddock where Thunder grazed peacefully in the morning sun, his coat gleaming like polished obsidian, his bearing noble and calm. "This is Thunder," Sully said quietly. 5 years ago, he was scheduled to be put down because everyone thought he was too dangerous to live. 3 men died trying to break him. Now look at him. The family stared in wonder at the magnificent horse who lifted his head at Sully's approach and walked over calmly, pressing his forehead against Sully's chest in their customary greeting. The contrast between the story they had heard and the reality they were witnessing was almost impossible to reconcile. The woman in the family, tears streaming down her face, asked the question that everyone eventually asked. "How did you do it? What's your secret?" Sully stroked Thunder's neck thoughtfully before answering. "There's no secret. Not really. It's about seeing the animal as an individual with their own history and trauma, not just a problem to be solved. It's about patience, about moving at their pace instead of forcing them to move at yours. It's about trust, which has to be earned through consistency and respect. But most importantly," he paused, looking into Thunder's eyes and seeing his own journey reflected there. "It's about recognizing that sometimes the broken things in this world aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to be accepted, understood, and given the space to heal themselves." He agreed to work with their horse, as he had agreed to work with dozens of others over the years. Some of the animals made remarkable progress, transforming from aggressive or fearful creatures into trusting companions. Others improved more slowly, teaching Sully patience he hadn't known he possessed. A few remained troubled despite his best efforts, and those failures hurt, but he had learned that not every story had a perfect ending, and there was dignity in trying even when success wasn't guaranteed. Thunder remained central to Sully's work, not just as inspiration but as an active participant. Sully discovered that traumatized horses often responded well to Thunder's presence, as though they recognized in him a fellow survivor who had walked the path they were on. Thunder seemed to understand his role in this mission, remaining calm and steady around even the most agitated animals, offering them a model of what healing could look like. The ranch became known throughout Montana and beyond as a place of second chances, where horses who had been written off could find redemption, and where humans who worked with them could learn that patience and compassion were more powerful than force. Clayton, now in his 70s, watched the transformation of his ranch with quiet pride, knowing that allowing Sully and Thunder their week together years ago had created something far more significant than he could have imagined. On the anniversary of that first day 5 years ago, Sully stood in Thunder's paddock as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Thunder stood beside him, and together they watched the day transition to night in companionable silence. Sully thought about the man he had been when he arrived here, lost and broken and unsure if life was worth continuing. He thought about the terrified, angry horse who had been days away from execution. And he thought about how two damaged souls had found each other at exactly the right moment and had somehow managed to save each other. "Thank you," Sully whispered to Thunder, his hand resting on the horse's strong neck. "Thank you for teaching me that it's possible to heal, that trust can be rebuilt, that our worst moments don't have to define our entire lives." Thunder's response was to lean into him, accepting the gratitude with the same grace he had accepted everything else in their journey together. As darkness fell over the ranch and stars began appearing in the vast Montana sky, man and horse stood together, two survivors who had found in each other exactly what they needed most. Their story would be told for years to come, inspiring others to look at trauma and fear and violence not as permanent states, but as challenges that could be overcome with patience, understanding, and love. In saving Thunder, Sully had saved himself. In learning to trust again, Thunder had taught Sully that redemption was always possible, even for those who thought they were beyond saving. The wild horse that killed 3 men had become a symbol of hope. And the broken veteran who befriended him had discovered that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in fighting, but in the courage to be gentle, to be patient, and to believe that healing is possible even when every piece of evidence suggests otherwise.